No worries, man. I will edit it all. I'll make it sound super cool.
Awesome. That's all I asked.
All right, you ready?
Yeah, sure.
Great, Matt. Thank you so much for coming on my show. Before we even start, I have to say to you that you are the first person who has been in my home, in my studio, having this podcast with me. So thank you very much for taking the time to come out here in my home and welcome to my shop, my operation.
Thanks so much for having me.
Mm-hmm. It's really interesting, the timing of you being here, because Juliana, my fiance, who you met downstairs, I have been a writer basically my entire life. It's a theme that comes up on my show a lot, talking about my writing, and I'm sure people listening are kind of sick of hearing about it by now. But even more than like my websites and my businesses and all, the dreams and aspirations, the one thing in my life that I've always really, really wanted to do was write a book. And I've gotten pretty far sometimes, and then I go like, oh, like this shit sucks, and I throw it out. And that scrapbook right over there that you see on the desk, that's full of notes for a book I'm working on. And the timing is very, serendipitous, I suppose, to have somebody in the publishing business that could potentially kind of help me on my journey to start this. So with that, I know that's not really a question. I'm kind of like leaving it a little bit open-ended for you. To know is like, God, what is that first step? Like, how do you get over that hurdle that I'm sure like 99% of the world's writers and people that want to write a book get stuck on, of just that, like.
No, that's a great question. But I mean, even judging by the scrapbook over on the desk, the first step is to write, to get it down on paper, get something down, no matter how bad you think it is, get it down. Because a lot of people, they want to write a book and they never take that first step at sitting down in front of that first blank document on their screen or a blank piece of paper and getting things down. So I would say that's always the first main hurdle to overcome, is to just start writing. And then the second one that follows behind it is, if you really want your message to travel as far as it can possibly travel and reach the people that you want it to reach and make a difference, take the time to learn from writers who have really worked at improving their craft. And that means reading well, first of all, something our teachers in grade school would have told us ad nauseum, and as well as actually reading books on the art of writing.
Sure.
People that want to learn how to cook, they read books on how to cook well. People who want to start a business read books on how to run a business well. So that's advice that I routinely give to authors, writers, prospects, and clients, is find books on the craft and art of writing and read those as well along the way.
I'm having a real moment with you saying that, because I've been an avid reader my entire life. And if there's anything that I want to learn how to do, I've always been able to kind of take it upon myself to just find a book and sit down and read it. But I don't know, I guess because the two are so closely correlated, like writing and reading, that you would almost think that in order to be a better writer, you just keep writing instead of stepping away from the writing and do some reading. And hearing you say it is like such common sense. Like, oh yeah, duh, why don't I just read a book on how to write better? But like, till this day, that's never popped in my head.
Well, it wouldn't let you off the hook from your writing assignment on the regular. That's got to be homework on top of,
of course,
of getting those words down on paper. But we all need good teachers, right, to lead the way and challenge us to be a better version of ourselves. And for a writer, what are you bringing into your brain that's challenging you to be a better writer?
Do you believe in, I read a book recently called Steal Like an Artist by Austin Kleon. And basically his concept is there's really no such thing as like original ideas. Like everything that we write or paint or sing or anything is basically like rooted from someone else.
He stole that actually from Ecclesiastes in the Bible. There's nothing new under the sun. So even that was picking up on an idea. Yes, I think yes and no. There's the big struggles that we have as human beings. Not to go too philosophical on you here, but
Sure.
the big struggles of what's the world, what's my place in it, what are the forces around that, love, beauty, struggle, you know, basically life. Those questions don't change, but every single one of us has got a different life experience and, like you said, different stories to tell. And so year after year, people find a way to offer new or fresh perspective on whatever lens or filter of life they're reviewing or surveying at the time.
I like that because it sounds to me what you're saying, at least how I'm interpreting it, is that although like the human experience is consistent throughout people, there's still like a filter of our own perception,
Yeah.
which is always unique. No matter if 10 people have the same idea, it's still going to come out of every one of us in a different way.
Right.
So there's still some uniqueness about it.
And also sometimes within the contextual backdrop of the time and place and world we're living in. You know, you might not tell a story to someone today the same way you would have told it just after World War I, because their frames of reference are different.
Absolutely. Who, from the way that you mentioned having teachers, quote unquote, I could see when you were saying that there were some teachers that you had in terms of like influences on you. Like who would they be for you?
Well, gosh, I mean, several teachers career-wise at any one of a number of different places. Are you looking more for teachers in general, or teachers about writing or publishing, or something in between, or both? Or
yeah, so when you were talking about it,
sure,
basically, I don't know if I'd go as strong to say my idol in terms of his work, but
yeah,
I mean, pretty close. Like I respect his writing style. I've always tried to mimic how he writes in because when you write online, you're writing in a different format because people online are a lot like less patient. So you almost have to write in like little bite-sized chunks, sort of.
yes.
And so I kind of adopted my writing style in terms of like short paragraphs and just real direct points and not a whole lot of like descriptive words. So that's an example for me. And when I heard you saying that, it seemed like you had influences.
Well, there, in terms of talking about what's really developed my thinking around both the writer's life and journey, right? That beautiful struggle, and craft. There are two books probably that have really stood out to me over time that I recommend over and over again. And one of them is Anne Lamott's Bird by Bird, some instructions on writing and on life. And Lamott, she's written both fiction and non, has written really one of the great books on coming to faith experience, written for people not from that faith background. So as being here in Nashville, for instance, faith-based publishing is really big. I spent a good portion of my career in that. We are in the buckle of the Bible Belt, and but she's one of those authors that actually sat outside more in the literary market and wrote about that. But she also wrote this book about the writer's life. And I mean, there's a famous, well, I don't know how famous it is, but scene that I love that she writes of storming her New York editor's apartment, just raving upset, because the markup on her manuscript. And she's like, you just don't get it. It's supposed to do this and this. And I was saying this and this. And the editor finally stopped her. He's like, Anne, then write that, And, but it just shows how much of that's built up in the angst that you feel as you're pouring over this manuscript. And so I always recommend that as this is kind of like your comfort food for the writer's journey, right?
Yeah.
And then for the more technical aspects of craft, there's a book by a guy named Sol Stein, and it's really not that well known or popular. But Stein was an editor and then publisher for one of the larger independent houses in New York in the 70s and 80s, before that era's consolidation of big New York publisher gobbling up smaller or medium-sized New York publisher. He was James Baldwin's editor, worked on a number of famous authors' works during that time. And he wrote a book called Stein on Writing. Okay. And it's one of the best books, if not the best book I've ever read on the mechanics of craft. A lot of what he covers applies to fiction. One of the best chapters on writing dialogue that I've ever read.
I've always struggled with
that. I know writing dialogue is hard. Writing comedy is hard.
Super
hard. Has a fabulous section on how you draw a character in a book, in terms of painting that picture, but leaving enough to the reader's imagination that they fill in the blanks. And it was, it's stuck out so much to me that I was at a book industry trade show in California, and I had a cross-country flight back to Nashville, and I remember having this book on the plane, and it's the only book on the craft of writing that I've ever gotten to the end and turned back to page 1 to start reading it again. Which most of us can't say of many how-to books.
Yeah.
Right? So those are always two that stand out in my mind.
You mentioned that that internal, awful, what'd you call it? A beautiful struggle. And I'm sure all art can speak to that in some way. I think there's something that's like particularly tormenting about trying to figure out how to get whatever is going on inside of you into like words on a page. And like, I don't know why, maybe it's just because writing has always been like my craft. And I'm sure like, whatever painters or something could explain it a little more. But I think for me, the part that would always, I'm being dramatic using the word torture, but sometimes I stay up at night because I guess obsessive is a little bit more about it, where you just know that there's something else to be said and you haven't quite formulated your sentences in like the perfect way to where like you hit that last little enter and you can sit back and you go like, like that's it, because it when you do it, like there are those moments that are real few and far between where you just sit down and you pump something out and then and the ending sticks and you can just sit back and be like, oh, I got it. And then I'm like always chasing that feeling,
We're always looking for like the 3-point landing in Olympics gymnastics, right? Like course. They hit the pad and stand like that. And it can be elusive at times.
I think that a very influential book that I read was called The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. And he calls it the resistance. It's that thing inside your mind where the harder you push at it, the more it pulls, kind of like a rubber band. And man, I think that was one of those books where as soon as I read the last page, I think I even I was still living in Florida and I got Juliana. I was like, Jules, let me read this last page to you. And like I read it out loud, and just how we talked about the spiritual experience that conquering your art, because art a lot of times rules us. Like it takes over us in a way where you're trying to scratch that itch that I was just talking about. But in that book, The War of Art, he talks about like the discipline of just writing every day and getting through that real messy process, because it's never like a pretty process. Like writing is really ugly and stumbly, and like it's kind of bashing through like a battering ram in a way. And just that feeling you get where you've done your art for the day and you've won the war of art for the day. It's a real beautiful scene in my mind. And I know I'm kind of rambling on about it, but like everybody that has that feeling that we're talking about, I think should read that book.
Yeah, absolutely. What's interesting, what you say that reminds me of too, is one difference between writing at the point that you're working on something you want to be published in book form from just something that you write to post online, to hit send, to hit publish or post, or even in the world of self-publishing. I mean, you can finish it and send it out exactly as it is if you want to, and let your art be completely free from tinkering or tampering. But if you decide to actually publish with a publisher and bring your art into the world that way, then distinctly different from a painter who's the only person whose brush touches the canvas, or a sculptor who puts his chisel down to a finished work. With a book, you then subject yourself to a whole nother realm of sometimes torturous process in opening your manuscript up to be reviewed by sometimes multiple editors and a proofreader and a fact checker and a publisher and a host of other voices that then are providing more rounds of critique or revision or food for thought about it, how to refine that art even more.
So we're transitioning a bit more into the business side of writing, and I guess it's kind of a perfect segue for that, because obviously that's why we're here, and I want to learn a lot more about your story. But listening to you talk about that, it still kind of makes you, like, for instance, I have to send a company-wide email at the business that I work at, and there's 600 employees, and every Monday I have to send a company-wide newsletter. And like, before I hit send, I go like, okay, I need somebody to read this for me just to make sure I didn't write anything stupid. And that process alone is like, oh man, what's he thinking? Like, did I screw something up? Did I say something stupid? I can't imagine what it would feel like to have an entire slew of people who aren't just reviewing it, but they're reviewing it in a very systematic process where like you're intentionally breaking it down at certain parts. Oh, oh man. Have you ever gone through that process yourself?
As far as an author letting someone else review my work that way? No, so far I haven't been brave enough to be on the receiving end, only on the delivering end of that.
But it seems process. Like you're very passionate about the publishing industry.
I am extremely passionate about the publishing industry. One of the reasons that I pursued this line of work is because I believe in the power of ideas to equip, inform, entertain, empower, and inspire people. And the written word on the printed page in book form, if you think, many people refer to books as a technology of sorts. It is. It's really a technology that in some ways hasn't been bested since Gutenberg. That content delivery mechanism for ideas is an amazingly powerful thing that changes nations and societies and cultures and individuals one person at a time. And I think that is an incredible thing.
Yeah, when you say it out loud and you think of the context of what the written word, especially post the printing press, the influence and the change that it's had on every single society, almost like independently of each other, so it's not like one society kind of had like an overwhelming impact on anything else. Like they all did it on their own. I think you're right that in a way, this might be an arrogant thing to say because I don't necessarily have like enough facts to back it up, but I think you could argue that books have been more influential than the internet. I can't think of how you could argue against it.
There's nothing to say that isn't going to shift over time. I mean, certainly the internet is a world-changing technology, and it's changing even the book industry and challenging the way that books are consumed or discovered or found or engaged with. And new technology is going to continue to do that. But certainly if you look at the past 500 years combined with a lot of other historical events, books have had massive influence over the transformation, and advancement of our societies. I'm reading Walter Isaacson's biography on Leonardo da Vinci right now.
Sure.
When he talks about kind of this perfect ideal setting for Da Vinci and the Renaissance to flourish and lead to all these breakthroughs. And
like post the plague and all that.
Well, it was post the plague. There was actually a period of relative peace for 40 or 50 years. So all the money wasn't going into wars. At the same time, you had the structure even of, for instance, the Medici family. They were governing, but governing outside of this formal political or military government system. And as you know, they were wealthy bankers who ended up being the bankers of Europe at the time. And so they were investing all of this money in arts. So you had this combination of this governmental system and their positioning and peace and the printing press coming to light and providing new material and content and ways for it to spread. And then even on top of that, he mentions, if I'm remembering this properly, you also had like fall of Constantinople. And so you had also this big influx of scholars bringing their own manuscripts west. And that provided this environment, for that to flourish. But certainly the book was a key core component of that advancement of society and ideas. Yeah.
It's so interesting. Yeah. I don't know my history that well, but with,
and I may have gotten some of that wrong. So don't go.
No, well, that part that period of time has always been very fascinating to me, especially because a lot of, Western society is kind of selfish and self-absorbed, but like almost all of the scholarly work at that time, especially mathematics, was over like Eastern societies, So like once Constantinople fell, then I think it was the Ottoman at that point, the Ottoman Empire, pushed all of that over. I don't know if that's completely true in terms of the timing. It might have been the Byzantine Empire. Anyway,
we'll have to get a historian on the podcast for that one.
See, that is a problem with the internet, though, is you end up saying some shit, and then like a week later, you get all these angry mobsters. Exactly.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so I want to know a little bit more about the actual process, because you talked about the change in how technology is changing the publishing industry, and right away, what came to me is probably, I don't know if you'd say the invention, but the influx of ebooks, because now anybody can write a 20,000 page ebook. You don't even necessarily have to self-publish it. You just put it in a PDF and you put it out there. Does that frighten you at all in terms of like the business of publishing, how everything is spread out so thin now?
Yeah, that's a great question. No,
Frightens me
it
sometimes.
actually doesn't frighten me at all. I think it's fantastic. And the reason I think it's fantastic is because even if people want to digest things in book form, but as a PDF, even if they want to post it for free online, you're still exposing new ideas to the world, right? So what's interesting to me as somebody who's followed the industry, and I would say ebooks are definitely one change in technology, whether it's formally publishing something via Kindle in the iBook store, or posting a PDF to your website. That's one major shift technologically. But in the publishing industry, the other major one has been the rise of print-on-demand publishing, which has really made it much more scalable and affordable for someone to get a printed book, even in really small quantities,
Sure.
and make that book available.
Because you don't have to put all that money up front, not knowing if you're going to sell them all.
That's right. So in general, I'm a believer in spread more ideas, right? But what the economy of publishing has shown us is just because it's available doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be discovered or consumed.
Yes.
Or
absolutely
proliferate, right?
Absolutely.
And so, I kind of joke with friends in the industry that there's never been an easier time to publish, better time to publish. It's never been easier to publish, and it's never been more difficult
to get discovered.
To publish. The statistics were last year that of the 86,000 actual publishers in the country, last year they produced about 300,000 new titles
in
for
1
the
year.
Marketplace. On top of that, self-published titles by self-published authors through other.
Okay, hold on.
Yeah.
What you just said, 300,000 published works in 1 year, isn't even including self-published books?
No. 300,000 there from actual publishers, another 700,000 self-published. So last year, we introduced 1 million new books to the market.
I admire how you do not suffer from scarcity complex. I think that is so difficult for people to do. And I have seen in my own short experience as a business owner, entrepreneur, whatever, anytime somebody starts worrying about there's not going to be enough for me is exactly the time when things start to kind of get sucked away from them. There's some kind of weird universal energy where putting it out there and helping other people seems to I'm sorry if you guys can hear that. My dog is right outside the door. Where putting it out there and helping spread as much new information and helping as many people as possible always seems to reciprocate. And I think that takes a lot
philosophy.
I think it takes a lot of courage to live that way, because it's so much easier to it reminds me of this book called The 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene, where one of the laws was like, never fortify yourself in a castle, because there's just no way to stop stuff from coming to get you, no matter how hard you try. And it reminds me of that, where if you try to like bunker down and say like, this is our way of doing things, and we need to hold on to this, whether it's like romantic or tradition or whatever, it's just not going to work, because you can't stop progress. It's going to come in the way that it's going to come,
It is. And honestly, if you look at most industries over the last 100 years and American business in general, and I'm really simplifying and generalizing here, but you think about most businesses that have gone through periods of consolidation, the cottage industry gets eaten up. There's scarcity, there's a commoditization impact that takes place. And then inevitably, the consolidators, the people that pull all the marbles into themselves, reach this point where for some reason the marbles are no longer as valuable to them anymore, or they figure out the only way that they can continue to profit further is to start selling the marbles off again.
Yeah.
Either that or a new technology comes along
that makes the marbles obsolete.
An entirely new cottage industry.
Yeah.
So what I'm really interested in publishing is that publishing is going through these series of consolidations, and retail with regard to books is going through these series of consolidations. And so what I'm curious about is, what's the next cottage industry that springs up?
What do you think it's going to be? What's your hunch?
I hope part of it's my company, right? And what we're trying to accomplish in the marketplace. But to give even an example from the retail side.
Yeah, I want to know, like, what's the cutting edge type thing that's going on?
It's not even, it's not even necessarily cutting edge, but you saw the rise of the big box store Barnes and Noble and Borders, and it was these big footprint stores, heavy real estate throughout the 90s and early 2000s. And then Amazon started coming along and eating everybody's lunch. And now Borders is gone, right? They've been gone, gosh, almost a decade now.
Almost 10 years,
right?
yeah.
But those chains ate up and really winnowed away the ABA independent store, like Parnassus in Nashville, in Green Hills,
Okay.
which is a very famous independent, nationally known.
Okay.
But now Barnes and Noble is under pressure, and they've closed stores and are retrenching. And the little independent mom and pop bookshop, they're growing. Their numbers are up. Their membership in their leading trade organization is up in double digits, and their sales were up last year. Printed hardcover book sales were up by single digits last year. And so they're different from what they once were, right? They recognize that they need to be locally focused and community oriented, and to be really event minded, bringing a lot of authors in, having readings, having events. But in the process, what they've done is they've reclaimed their spot in the community as a place where ideas are exchanged. So it still comes back to ideas being exchanged.
Yeah. It's very similar to like maybe the food or fitness. There's something going on in the country right now where I think people are, look, as much as Amazon's going to continue to grow and everybody can say what they want, but we all buy stuff from Amazon. There's still I think people are worried about losing local communities. And I think that sense of community is helping small business owners, such as, local commerce or farmers markets. Like the East Nashville Farmers Market is probably a great example. And I'm sure that is crossing over into publishing as well. I think that's interesting because, and even a larger scale for my neck of the woods for online marketing, even the way Google has moved over the last 10 years, like Google as a whole has gone way less about big national, almost worldwide websites, like the Wikipedias of the world or like the WebMDs of the world. And now it's so much more about just small businesses in your local area.
Right.
I think that's, I'm making some like assumptions there, but I have a feeling that has to do with just overall shifts in the way people are kind of living their lives.
Sure. Now, on the other hand, there another new technology that's not really new, but that's changing the way people are consuming content and engaging with books is audiobooks. Audiobooks are actually the fastest category in book selling right now.
Killing
and of course, that's led by Audible, which is owned by Amazon.
No way.
Yes, but there are other. There are yes, dominant market share there.
Oh, jeez.
But I've actually been encouraged that Apple's announced that they are kind of retooling the way audiobooks are going to be
Spotify too
listed. It's Spotify as well.
Definitely.
And so, that's fascinating for me. And it makes me even think about just like my wife's a preschool teacher. And so she has continuing certification classes and comes in talking about, we were brought up to think there were only like 3 types of learners, right? Like you're the person that learns by hearing it or learns by reading it or learns by doing it. And she's like, well, I'm taking these classes now where there's all these other layers and combinations of 12 different learning styles. And what I see is with audiobooks, it's just another way to connect those ideas with people that might learn a different way.
Sure.
Right. And so I think that's interesting, even as we're sitting here and you're able to set up a really professional quality podcasting studio in a room in your home.
Yeah.
It's something you couldn't have done really 50 years ago, right? You had to go to a recording studio.
Absolutely.
And you've seen the changes in the music business. Well, the same is true even of audiobooks. Now, you're still going to learn this is what an amateur home produced audiobook from somebody who doesn't really know what they're doing on the production side.
They're different.
Sounds like and looks like. And
Definitely.
then you're going to have, here's what professional quality looks like. But there's still way more access to the tools to produce that content and publish it in some way.
Yeah. Yeah, I was gonna say I agree, but there's nothing to even like agree about. That's just it's just the way things are going. And almost side note on that, in terms of podcasting, and I'm sure this is probably true with audiobooks, especially once you almost get into like the self-published audiobooks quote. Sometimes I feel like the quality of it, the production quality, I mean, isn't actually as important to people as like big studios want it to be.
Really?
Yeah, I started this podcast just recording it on my phone. All jokes aside, and there's plenty of times like I usually still do the intros when I have this and I have the audio kind of ripped down and I start editing it. Right before I publish it, I usually go like, shit, I forgot to record the intro, and so I just do it on my phone. It's amazing.
Works just fine.
Yeah, it's amazing.
That's cool.
Okay, so let's transition one more time.
Yeah.
You know a lot about publishing, and you had mentioned earlier, like, well, hopefully some of the new waves are how my business is doing it. And we've had a great conversation so far, and thank you for not being so selfish with hogging up the air times. But I really, really want to hear how like you and your business plan on doing things a little bit differently.
Sure, glad to. So, my company, Dexterity,
yes,
we launched in January of last year. And the idea for my company actually came from me being on staff at the Nashville Entrepreneur Center.
Cool.
I had been in publishing for 20 years, had been really fortunate to do a variety of things over my career. A lot of time with national accounts and business development and sales and account management, working with Amazon and Barnes & Noble and Books A Million and the big giants of the industry. And but also got to spend time working with the library market and mom and pop stores and acquiring product and figuring out how to bring books to market. And I got this really well-rounded suite of experience during my time with other publishers. And by virtue of working with Amazon and B&N, helped launch an ebook publishing platform, led a systems implementation for publishing software that sends your product information out so your books can be more highly discoverable. Yep. And so I got to touch on a lot of new business initiatives that kind of hinted at where the publishing industry is going in terms of how people engage with books, both at the industry level and at the consumer level. And so I left my last publishing role, did some independent consulting, and this role came open to run an accelerator program, which is like a boot camp for startups. Sure. That was like run by the Entrepreneur Center. Yeah, like an incubator, run by the Entrepreneur Center, but sponsored by Ingram Content Group, which Ingram is based here in Nashville, and they're the largest book distributor in the world and multi-billion-dollar enterprise.
Oh shit!
Distribution and just, I'm not even sure how many countries. They've got facilities on 5 continents. Wow. Humongous, right? And they really wanted to use the EC's know-how at running these incubators to innovate, to kind of look for new ideas that were innovating in the publishing, printing, and creative space. And I had the good fortune to be the publishing industry lead that built out the curriculum for these 7 startups that came from all over the world and teach them about publishing. Wow. But the cool thing was, while I'm teaching publishing to some of these founders who came from tech backgrounds and not book backgrounds, I'm learning the world of the startup. And I was really blown away by the EC community, by the spirit of collaboration and positivity and energy. People were just aspirational. They're thinking about how to do things differently. They're not married to the status quo. I saw entrepreneurs from completely different business sectors sharing ideas openly and trying to figure out how they could partner with one another. And it was just like I'd found my people in my place. Like, it's so the way I see business has the potential to be, right? To be community oriented, to be collaborative and positive, which links back to this idea of my philosophy about publishing, which is there's enough for everybody. Let the ideas spread, right? And the ideas will find their readers. And so we spent this 9 months talking about how there's all this change and disruption in the industry, but how disruption is really opportunity if you're just willing to consider doing things differently.
Of course it is.
From the way they've been done. And we also spent time talking about this kind of artificial line that's been drawn in the sand from the traditional publishing industry and that business model, which, you know, largely is dependent on these larger publishers writing checks in advance before they ever get a manuscript, which are an advance against future royalty payments, and that are non-refundable, giving agents a percentage of the proceeds from those checks, assuming all this financial burden and risk, gambling that 2 years from now, the market is still going to want this idea. Well, what's happened in the industry, similar to the music industry, is that these larger publishers are gobbling up all the small and medium-sized publishers, the consolidation we're talking about. So yesterday's author at a mid-sized publisher that was getting a pretty nice advance check, and they were getting a real marketing plan and real marketing dollars spent, an editor who was the perfect fit and passionate about their idea and understood exactly how to bring it to the world. Well, once that company gets bought, now they might be way further down on the list, and the advance checks have shrunk, and the editor who knew them inside and out is no longer even there. And it gets really, really easy for that author, if you're not the best-selling star, to get lost.
If you're not James Patterson.
If you're not James Patterson or King or Patricia Cornwell or insert famous best-selling author here, you know, it's easy to get lost in the shuffle. At the far other end of the spectrum is the self-publishing market, where there's tons of volume. It's really that there's almost no cost barrier to entry, right? I mean, a couple of $100, right? And you can publish a book, if that, right? But the whole system is designed to be self-serve, right? Upload the file. Well, the system will tell you if it validates. Good luck. Best wishes to you. But if you want to talk to a human being, or if you want expertise about how to find your readers or how to submit your manuscript to that next layer of torture, or if you own a content and branding can already reach your readers directly, then sometimes it doesn't even make sense to go through that traditional process.
I agree.
So what I see is an emerging need for companies that can sit in the middle, and instead of propping up this artificial line between the two worlds, bridge the gap. And that's what Dexterity aims to be. So we offer a full menu of publishing services that either publishers can get a la carte and use this as an outsourcing service, or indie authors can use a la carte and say, I'd like an editor for this project, for this timeline, in this budget range, or I'm really in need of a graphic designer that understands my brand. Or we can offer those menu options as an end-to-end solution with us as the publisher, but not following that traditional model of advance check up front, no wait 2 years to publish, but building client partnerships where everyone is invested on the front end, and we're working together with a tremendous amount of transparency. So we're making decisions about your business and brand all along the way that makes sense for you as a client. And so, for instance, our very first book that we published was by a guy named Tim Shaw, who is a linebacker for the Tennessee Titans, who went public with his ALS diagnosis last year.
Oh, wow.
And Tim had a story that he wanted to tell to inspire other people to know what they were meant to do and to pursue that passion no matter what. But he didn't have 2 or 3 years to wait, right? And so we were able to take Tim's book, and we went from rough manuscript to finished books, printed offset in Nissan Stadium in 75 days. And we launched the book on New Year's Day at the Titans versus Texans game with a signing on the South Lawn. They dedicated the opening ceremony to Tim. The book went up on the Jumbotron TV screens. I think, and the announcer said, if you buy one book this year, it ought to be Blitz Your Life. And I think we might actually have bragging rights. You'll have to check facts on this, to be the first publisher to launch their book in their company at an NFL game. And
I'm pretty sure you are.
But that book went on to get national media. It was published with every bit of the same quality standards of any book coming out of New York. It was carried by Barnes & Noble. It was available on Amazon. We built a custom sales plan for the author to be able to sell copies himself, and had Shopify integration with our warehouse. And as of this spring, won awards from the Primary Trade Association for Independent Book Publishers, including Best First Book by Newhouse.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
How's that feel?
It is really humbling and surreal at the same time, because in the middle of all that great story that is that I think represents what a new kind of publisher is able to do. And one added note on that, also inspired by the community at the EC, instead of hiring this heavy infrastructure of employees like traditional publishers, I've built a community that's basically a publishing collective of like-minded independent business owners and publishing service professionals that want to maintain their independence as, in effect, solopreneurs or small business owners, but team up and collaborate on projects that allows us to find just the right talent for each project and client. In between that, though, is the roller coaster ride that is building a small business that is every entrepreneur's journey. And what I tell people is, it's mountaintop to Death Valley at a moment's notice, right? Every little victory feels like a mountaintop experience, and every little obstacle feels like a kick in the gut. And you can go from one extreme to the other in a matter of hours, right?
Yeah.
And so our team is tremendously honored to have that accomplishment for our first book out of the gate. But at the same time, building something new and different, it's roll up your sleeves work every single day, and we don't take it for granted.
You got me kind of speechless, honestly. Beautiful story. I think it's a testament to a few things. I think, like I said before, it's a testament to your passion for the actual industry, and even more than that, the spreading of ideas. That means a lot to you. I can see that. And more than that, I think it's a testament to taking advantage of the changing tides, just like you had mentioned, because I mean, unless you're the quote, 1%ers of authors. Nobody's going to write you like a $300,000 advancement check. And then, I mean, publishers they're basically like venture capitalist firms. I mean, that's probably the closest comparison.
We've said legalized gambling, but
yeah,
I mean,
sure. But then on the other end, it's like, okay, you had this book, like you said, the other end of the spectrum. We can put it together for you. So congratulations, here's your book. But there's no marketing involved with that. There's probably like low end graphic design. So for the amount of people out there who love to write, like myself, and who dream to have a book, aren't necessarily aspiring to sell like 80 million copies,
right.
I think there's a huge need for what you're doing. And I like it when there's a struggle involved, because I think it makes like the victories that much sweeter. I've seen it means something to have to really work for that and to experience like the highs and lows, and I experience them myself sometimes multiple times a day. But man, this is why I love doing this podcast, honestly. Like I told you before we got on, like everybody has something cool to say. That is so cool to hear you say that, and to hear that story, and to see like the fire build up inside of you, and knowing that you feel like you're just getting started. That's great. It's
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Sure.
We hopefully we've already got so many other stories to share. And I guess, one of the things that I've just been really struck by is that every author that we work with, every client that we work with, there's a reader out there, right? It doesn't have to be 80 million and for their book to make a difference in somebody's life.
Yeah.
I mean, Tim's book, we got, letters from people saying it was impacting, it was one of the best books on leadership they'd read, that it was changing the way they were leading their companies. He interviews in his book stories of other CEOs and entrepreneurs. Mike Brody-Waite from the CEO of the EC is interviewed in the book. Shares his story. Musicians, pro athletes, some of whom have overcome incredible adversity to achieve a form of success. And so when you get that feedback, that rare moment in the middle of the struggle, in the middle of, oh man, this didn't come together. Oh, this file's not the right format. When every once in a while you get a story from somebody that says, this book changed my life. We published a book in January, leading expert on food addiction recovery. So this woman's out of Philadelphia area, Dr. Rona. She spent 30 plus years in addiction recovery, running 12-step programs, licensed counselor, and recovering food addict herself, and had published a book with another publisher about how the chemicals in our food are as addictive as other substances. Why don't we treat treatment the same way? Right. And so that was kind of the clinical book. And then this book we did was because she wanted kind of a little intimate entry point for people that know there's not something quite right with my relationship with food, and I need God's help to figure it out. Right. So she's a person of faith herself. And, one of the core tenets of a lot of the 12-step programs is you got to get in touch with something bigger than yourself. Right. Mm-hmm. And so this 90-day devotional, we released it in January, and she's getting letters from people saying this book literally saved my life.
Yeah.
We got a letter from a woman who was like a second-year resident at this treatment center working with a patient that had just had weight loss surgery and had to completely re-engineer the way he thought about food, and was writing this to tell us what an impact this was having this person re-engineer, what's a really difficult part of their life to surmount. So you just look at that and you go, man, how could you not be excited?
Absolutely. How could you not?
How could you not?
Yeah, that's like what living is all
And
about.
if you sell 3,000 copies or 50,000 copies,
You're making a difference.
you're making a difference.
100%. There's, like you said before, there's people out there that got exactly what they needed to get from the work that you guys are doing, and I think that's beautiful. Man, thank you so much for coming here once
Yeah,
again. I can
absolutely.
keep talking to you. I feel like I have to
Yeah.
kind of cut this off because I
No,
gotta go eat
that's
my dinner. But one last time before we sign off, please take this next like 2 minutes. Shameless plug. What's your website? Where can they find you? How can they contact you?
sure, absolutely. Our website is dexteritybooks.com, and feel free to reach out to us there. We're on Facebook as well.
Yep.
And like I said, we're actively growing our client roster and helping people get their ideas where they want, and offering some services that some independent authors might not have access to, as well as serving trade publishing clients, and all with kind of a knowledge born of this community of now almost 30 different publishing professionals.
It's amazing.
Both here in Nashville and elsewhere,
It's amazing.
that care about spreading ideas and making people's lives better.
That's amazing. I will link all of that stuff up in the show notes of the post of this podcast
Yeah.
for you. Thank you so much again.
So
One more
much,
time.
Tim.
I really
It was
appreciate it.
great.
Guys, thank you
Fabulous.
so much for listening. If you could do me a favor, leave a rating and a comment on the iTunes is the best thing you can do to support the show. I appreciate you guys. Matt, thank you one last time. Talk to you next week. Dude, you're a natural.
Oh, please.